for the virtual, or the magic tech people behind the scenes will start the webinar for the virtual folks. Okay. Not entirely sure how everything works here, so I hope you all will just bear with me. Good morning. Happy Friday of our annual UNC adventure, finally back in person. I'm Lisa Schexman. I'm the Senior Strategic Engagement Advisor in USAID's Center for Water Security, Sanitation, and Hygiene. And we're really excited to have you here. Thank you for staying on Friday. We really wanted to entice you to stay. As I think hopefully everyone knows, we recently launched the 2022 U.S. Global Water Strategy. And we're thrilled to be with all of you and everyone online as well to host our first event focused on USAID's contributions to the global water strategy. So the strategy itself was the culmination of about 18 months worth of work under the joint leadership of USAID and the Department of State. We went through extensive collaboration with more than 15 federal departments and agencies who contribute to the objectives of the global water strategy, as well as hearing from many of you. The strategy reflects a lot of consultation, a lot of analysis of evidence, and really a lot of really critical comments that I think many of you submitted. And I know Jeff's going to talk about this more and others later, but also the first time we've really substantively collaborated with our humanitarian affairs colleagues as well. So humanitarian assistance. Sorry, Tracy, dang it. I'll get it right. So during the next hour, let me see if I can advance these slides properly. No. Yes. Okay, so here's our agenda. We have just about an hour and a half, and we're trying not to overload anyone with content. We want to make sure that this is interactive, that you have the chance to answer questions. We really want folks to come away feeling clearer and more excited about the direction that USAID will be going in across humanitarian assistance, as well as conflict prevention, stabilization, and development and global health, and to just have the chance to think about what new and exciting things we've put forward, and what those new and exciting things might mean to you. So we'll start out by hearing from Jeff Goldberg, who's our center director at USAID, and he's going to go over the kind of nuts and bolts of the strategy, the strategic objectives, the intermediate results, vision, goal, and targets, as well as principles. And then we'll have time for some Q&A from all of you, as well as everybody online. And then we will move into hearing from 4 of our wonderful mission water and sanitation leads, who will give a little bit more of a flavor of how each of the strategic objectives apply to mission programming, which is really where it's at. And we'll have a final round of Q&A after that. And just to say, for those online, I fully intend to alternate Q&A between in the room and those online. So please make sure that you're ready to drop your questions into the Q&A box as you have them. And I promise we'll do our best to answer. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff as soon as I figure out how to advance this slide. And I'll be back when Jeff's done.
All right, thanks, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. As Lisa mentioned, thanks for sticking it out to Friday. We're hoping to incentivize everybody to stay the full week. And Yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be here today to speak about our newly released and refreshed whole of government global water strategy and our approach at USAID for carrying this forward over the next 5 years. As Lisa mentioned, kind of my task and objective here this morning is to kind of walk you through the brass tacks, just to bring to life verbally that which is on the page. So I'm going to be walking through the vision, the goal, the targets, the strategic objectives, and then critically some pivots that we're making. This isn't a brand new strategy. The word refresh is really the kind of operational word here. And so there's some key things that we are changing, but there's some key things that we're keeping as well. So I want to put that out there for everybody. And just really note that, I think doesn't really bear stating to this crowd because you all know this, but with the triple threat of COVID, climate change, and then conflict on the rise globally, we really feel that this refresh is coming at just an absolutely critical time, not only to accelerate the pace of progress towards the SDGs, but to safeguard the progress that we've made to date too. So we're really thrilled to be putting this framework out there at this time and feel that it really couldn't be coming at a better time. So again, the focus of this session is on our USAID contributions to the global water strategy, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this is truly under the rubric of a whole of government effort. And at 10:30, there's a session that's going to be talking about that whole of government approach that we led in partnership with the Department of State. And to be clear, while we led it with the Department of State, the product and strategy in its entirety represents the technical contributions of 14 US government departments and agencies, running the full gamut of science and technology agencies like US Geological Survey, to some of our development counterparts like MCC and the Development Finance Corporation, and then other public health agencies like the CDC, who's here today. So we are really thrilled about this. And again, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening on water within the US government right now. We've got over even just the course of this last year, the White House Action Plan on Global Water Security. We have this global water strategy that's being released, and we really feel that heading into a big year for water with the 2023 UN Water Conference that was discussed yesterday during plenary, the US government is we're positioning ourselves for bold leadership at a really critical time where increased investment and attention on water is sorely needed. So with that, I am going to dive in and I'll walk us through the brass tacks. But one thing I want to say before we jump in, that when we talked about structuring this session, we really wanted it to come to life, like Lisa was mentioning. So while I have the unenviable task of kind of going through the brass tacks here, we have our field staff here that's going to talk about how this comes to life from a field perspective. And, really, the strategy is just one kind of milestone in product, but none of this comes to life without this happening in the field and without all of you as our implementing partners fully understanding everything that we've put into this document. So our real goal here is for an interactive session. So building on the brass tacks, we'll hear from the field, but we want to hear from all of you to make sure that we have dynamic engagement and that everybody kind of understands the strategic direction that we're trying to head in. So vision goals, let's start with those. So the overall vision of the newly released 2022 Global Water Strategy remains unchanged from 2017. We're clear-eyed and laser-focused on the longer-term vision of a water-secure world where people and communities have the water they need for health, prosperity, stability, and resilience. A key shift in this document, this go-around, is that last time we just had that broad vision and we jumped straight into strategic objectives and kind of technical orientation. But we felt that something was really missing in terms of not having a overall goal statement. So we've added a brand new statement that reflects really the cross-cutting nature of investments in water security, sanitation, and hygiene. We know, and everybody in this room knows, that water has multifaceted impacts on different development outcomes spanning health, prosperity, stability, and resilience. So ergo, we have a goal of improving health, prosperity, stability, and resilience through sustainable and equitable water resources management and service delivery. And just a finer point on this, over the better course of the past 2 years, as we've confronted multiple shocks and stresses in the global development ecosystem, we've really kind of had to go to task within our own system to communicate to lay decision makers the importance of water and sanitation to COVID recovery, to climate change. And we really feel that having a robust goal statement that unequivocally states the cross-cutting nature of investments in water and sanitation and how they're foundational to carrying forward progress across all of these development outcomes will really serve us well strategically. I think oftentimes as a sector, we just make assumptions that water and sanitation are important unto themselves, and they certainly are. But I think we've learned some hard lessons about needing to communicate those broader development outcomes. So that just puts a finer point on a lot of the motivation for putting this goal statement forward. So while pithy, there was a lot behind that. So let's move on to the next slide. So before we get into the overall strategic objectives and pivots, at a high level, we've set 4 ambitious targets that we'll strive to meet over the next 5 years, including for the first time ever, agency-wide targets on governance and finance. So we have long had targets on access to drinking water and sanitation. And the first target you'll see at the top of this graphic is just that. So looking back at the last 2017 global water strategy, we exceeded our targets of providing 15 million people with access to safe drinking water and 8 million people with access to sanitation. We actually provided 16 million people with access to water, and we really blew the sanitation target encouragingly out of the water in terms of where we were seeking to go at 14.8 million people with access to sanitation. So we really wanted to up our ambition here. So we've committed to reaching an additional 22 million people with access to safe drinking water and 22 million people with access to sanitation over the next 5 years. But critically, we have set sub-targets within that. So half of each of those access targets will focus on reaching those who are left behind. So we're going to be seeking at least half of each of those 22 million targets with first-time access in terms of where we're targeting our beneficiaries. And so we feel that that is a critical part of moving forward USAID's commitment to reaching the most marginalized, which I'll talk a little bit more about in this presentation. I think it's important to note, Lisa mentioned that we got a lot of feedback on this draft during the 18-month period of putting this together, and we heard from a lot of you about these access targets. And so I just want to directly address this. So we have increased the overall ambition, but we heard loud and clear that a lot of you wanted us to be doing more. So I want to note that these access targets are those that are directly attributable to US government interventions. So we have a kind of high level of rigor in terms of our monitoring and evaluation using taxpayer dollars of being able to go back and verify that indeed out of each of these 22 million targets that is directly attributable to US government assistance. I'll talk a little bit more about these governance and finance indicators, which capture some of the indirect attribution, which gets to much higher numbers that I know we're all trying to aspire towards, particularly with the JMP noting that we have to increase the rate of change by 4 to 7 times to reach SDG 6 by 2030. So we're keenly aware of all of this, but we have to balance much of our subject to audit and use of taxpayer dollars. So just a finer point there. But we still feel that this is very, very ambitious. And we put this in the plan, but just to verbalize it, Between the start of the strategy period in 2017 and the start of this strategy this year in 2022, our funding, the congressional appropriation, increased from 400 million annually to 475 million annually. So that's a 19% increase in funding over the last 5 years. But these targets represent a 47% increase for drinking water and 175% increase for sanitation. So these are very ambitious targets. While we know in gross numbers, they may not look like that, but in terms of direct verification and the rate of change that we're seeking relative to our funding envelope, they're quite ambitious. And we need all of you as our implementing partners to help us get there. So I did just mention the rate of change that's needed to achieve SDG 6, and we know that 4 to 7 times is quite a wake-up call in terms of how we're doing our work. And so for that reason, we have these targets on finance and governance. So if you look at the evolution of our strategies, in 2017, we included governance and finance for the first time as an objective, but we didn't have an agency-wide target that was seeking for us collectively to get to a certain benchmark. But this time, we've set a goal of mobilizing $1 billion in new public and private finance through our investments, and to strengthen 1,000 critical water security institutions in our high priority countries and other countries that are receiving water directive funds, so up to 30 countries. And really within our own system, what this does is it sets a positive incentive for our field missions, who you'll hear from shortly, to make sure that they're including this kind of work in their monitoring and evaluation plans and really moving all of that forward. So we're expecting that our indirect impact through this broader systems work on finance and governance and setting targets against those will really help us move the needle against that 4 to 7 times acceleration rate that we all so desperately need to achieve. So if we go to the next slide. So updated priorities. So I mentioned at the top, and I just want to repeat again, this is not an entirely new strategy. This is a refresh. We thought when we were starting this process 18 months ago, that the bones of the 2017 strategy were really good. So we are not wavering at all from our commitment to increase access to water and sanitation, particularly for the world's poorest, or from improving the management of freshwater resources. And these are kind of core to the Water for the World Act and the previous global water strategy and this iteration. As I've mentioned, we've also maintained our core belief and commitment to governance and finance in the broader enabling environment, and we're going to continue prioritizing investments in our 22 high priority countries. And this is really key for our work. But to be clear, it's a changing global landscape. COVID-19 certainly has changed the way we all do our work and affected the countries that we work in significantly. Climate change is being felt more acutely now more than ever, and conflict, as I mentioned, is on the rise. So we really wanted to be introspective when we were going through this process and make sure that we were looking at the broader external environment, but then also looking at evidence, the whole theme of this conference, and making sure that we put out in our strategy a commitment to move towards evidence-based approaches and a commitment to stop doing things too that we know don't work. And agency leadership was really, really emphatic about this point. Every time that we briefed up, we call it to the 6th floor, but to our agency front office, that was the question. It was, what are you not going to do under this strategy with limited resources, knowing what you know now about evidence? And I think we're really encouraged. I think for many of you in this room, coming on the heels of a long week of talking about sector evidence, hopefully none of this comes as a big surprise. I think that there's good sector alignment, but these were big shifts within our own system, given that we're often talking within USAID to leadership at missions that aren't directly working on water and sanitation, that aren't tracking this evidence as closely, and making sure that they fully understand what these evidence-based shifts are. So I'll walk through the four main ones now that you see up on the screen. And the first is a shift to area-wide coverage and professionalized services. So we know, and this has been talked about in many sessions throughout this past week, that past programming has targeted subsets of the population with lower cost solutions for water and sanitation access, such as specific households like first 1,000-day households or specific institutions, and has really relied on community management associations to sustain infrastructure and services. And an abundance of evidence has come out suggesting that these approaches are not the most cost-effective ways of maximizing longer-term sustainability of water and sanitation and reaching those health, prosperity, stability, and resilience outcomes that we all seek. So we have made a direct commitment, and you'll see embedded throughout the strategic objectives some key language that is seeking to move us toward area-wide sanitation coverage and towards professionalized water and sanitation service delivery overall. So we're very excited about this, and we know that it's going to take all of us, not only us in USAID kind of communicating through our RFPs and RFAs, but our implementing partner community as well, kind of taking this up and communicating back to us on how this is working across different contexts. I mentioned as well that we're also expanding our efforts to address inequalities and inequities in water and sanitation access as part of a broader inclusive development approach. This has been a huge priority across USAID writ large from our administrator. So the 2017 strategy certainly paid ample attention to gender equality and improving access to water and sanitation for women and girls, and we remain steadfast in that commitment. We know that women and girls bear the brunt of inadequate access to water and sanitation, and we remain firmly committed to making sure that our programming is sensitive to that and addresses that. But while we're continuing our commitment to gender equality, we're simultaneously recognizing that we have to consider all marginalized groups and vulnerable populations, which may include children in diversity, persons with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, Indigenous people, youth, and the elderly. And that in many of the countries that we're working in, discrimination and marginalization based on racial, ethnic, and religious identity definitely ties into water and sanitation access and management of water resources. And we want to do better in this regard. I think there have been some kind of platitudes over the years in this regard, but not concerted approaches to make sure that it's mainstreamed within programming. So under the leadership of Lisa, we are putting out some guidance within our system on inclusive development that speaks to this broader aperture of work. And we're quite excited about this and feel that there's a lot to be done. The next pivot from the 2017 Global Water Strategy is kind of an explicit recognition about the growing challenge of climate change and really emphasizing adaptation and resilience, both within water service delivery and water resources management as well. And critically, it's not just about adaptation and resilience. We're also going to be pursuing approaches to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions where possible in our programming. We know that there's a lot of emerging evidence about access to basic sanitation and greenhouse gas emissions and how to have greenhouse gas, how to progressively move towards net zero approaches. And we are firmly committed to making sure that we are taking this evidence and embedding it in our programming. Lastly, Lisa mentioned this, we are prioritizing, we're super excited that our Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance colleagues are here today. But through this process, we really had like a robust internal discussion about how to create a broad aperture that includes a strategic framework that our Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance and Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization colleagues can fit into. And to be clear, this revised strategy, as I mentioned, is coming at a time when the world is grappling with untold number of crises that are all linked to water. We know that the drought that's crippling the Horn of Africa right now is top of mind, not only in the foreign assistance community, but in the diplomatic community as well. That recent flooding in Pakistan left 1/3 of the country underwater, and that Putin's war in Ukraine has left millions in Ukraine without access to basic water services. So we as the US government, looking at our investments in kind of emergency, WASH, and peace building and development are really one of the largest bilateral donors in kind of this continuum. And we wanted to make sure that this global water strategy really represented that, and that we weren't just speaking to the development side of the house, but we were really creating space for us to strategically integrate our operational processes to make sure that we can deliver and effectively transition from these emergency situations to longer term development. So, and many of you know this, that many of the countries that we're even working in the development context are just increasingly fragile. So where our efforts come together with BHA and CPS, is only increasing. And so we're really excited that we have for the first time a dedicated strategic objective on anticipating and reducing conflict and fragility related to water and sanitation that will allow us to begin to do just that. So those are our pivots. And I'm going to quickly go through the strategic objectives, but I'm not going to go too deep because, like we mentioned at the top, we want to make sure that our field colleagues really bring this to life. So I'll walk through kind of one by one here, but just in terms of structure of our 4 field presentations, we have each of our field staff pegged to give an example per strategic objective. So I'll keep it high level and we'll get into the specifics with some actual programmatic examples. So the overall global water strategy strategic objective 1, as I mentioned, is really a re-articulation and a recommitment to investing in the broader enabling environment and investing in a systems approach to increase access to water and sanitation services and improve water resources management. We've expanded this SO from just governance and finance to be inclusive of institutions and markets as well, to make sure that we're capturing the full ecosystem that's needed to catalyze broader change within systems and accelerate access. So we're thrilled to have Joanne Dulce from USAID Philippines here, who will explain how the Philippines Safe Water Activity is working to accelerate progress through SO1. So we go to the next slide. So this strategic objective is really our bread and butter on access to water and sanitation. We've updated this strategic objective from 2017, really to include those updated priorities that I just spoke to. So you'll note the words climate resilient and equitable here. We're trying to specifically embed and cue that we want all of our investments in WASH to be climate sensitive and to be focused on achieving broader equity. And then the actual narrative of this SO cues to the need for area-wide approaches and professionalized service delivery that I spoke to in the pivot section. So we're thrilled to have Rami Webe here from USAID Lebanon, who's going to be speaking to how the Lebanon Water Project is working in partnership with government to improve the sustainability of the country's water service delivery systems. So under strategic objective 3, as in 2017, we are continuing to invest in watershed conservation and water resources management, but this time with an updated and more explicit emphasis on climate resilience to address rising water stress. So this is really a strategic objective that will aim for increased collaboration across the full interagency. And we know that this is absolutely critical, not only for our water-related outcomes, but as the world is facing a global food crisis, that water security and food security go hand in hand, that with the newly launched companion global food security strategy, there's a lot of synergies here that we're thrilled to be working with our food security colleagues on. So we know that these twin investments are going to be critical to improving the management of freshwater resources to improve water needed across all uses. So domestic potable use, agricultural use, manufacturing, and for the environment. And so we're thrilled to have Maricel Allende from USAID Peru, who's going to speak to how the Peru missions investments are partnering with local leaders to conserve watersheds and incentivize stakeholders to curb deforestation in the context of climate change. And then lastly, this is our brand new strategic objective that I just spoke to that seeks to bridge the gap between humanitarian assistance and development assistance, recognizing that we work in fragile contexts kind of the world over now. So under this strategic objective, we're focused on systems preparedness, emergency response, conflict mitigation, and really a do no harm posture that focuses on marginalized people that are at greatest risk in this increasingly fragile setting. So Amanda Robertson from USAID Kenya will be calling in and is going to speak to the Kenya Mission's Partnership for Resilience and Economic Growth that facilitated joint planning efforts between the National Drought Management Authority and 33 USAID supported partners, including those on water and sanitation. So last but certainly not least, all of the work that I just laid out is going to be guided by 4 operational principles, which reflect the updated priorities that I laid out earlier, and Administrator Power's agency-wide policy priorities as well. And really, as you see here, these include work to strengthen global, national, and local systems, localization being a critical aspect of Administrator Power's vision for the agency, focusing again on the needs of the marginalized and underserved people and communities in those vulnerable situations, again, taking a broader aperture, making sure that we're being inclusive of all marginalized communities, leveraging data, research, learning, and innovation, and incorporating resilience across all aspects of this strategy. Just very quickly, we know that oftentimes operational principles end up kind of being viewed as kind of nice to have language in strategies, but we have included in our agency plan specific accountability mechanisms and measures that we're committed to using in our own internal systems to make sure that we are reviewing all agency-wide investments to make sure that they are accounting for these principles. We want this to, in essence, we want this to be real. All right, so if we go to the next slide, the last thing I'll mention, I know that several of you were at our session yesterday on our Global Water Strategy Action Research Initiative. We want to make sure that our approach to learning and adapting doesn't only come every 5 years when we have a global water strategy refresh. So we're really, really thrilled, and I just want to kind of connect some dots to have this overarching action research initiative that's complemented by our Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance's research initiative as well, to make sure that we are consistently incorporating research and evidence into a feedback loop with our field missions and updating our priorities consistently over this 5-year period. So under this initiative, we're working through collaborative partnerships across 12 critical topics to ensure that findings are applied in real time to development and humanitarian programming and policymaking. And again, you all are critical to this. We don't want this to just be a once in every 5 years exercise that we're updating our whole of government strategy. And so we have laid out this research initiative from a headquarters perspective to make sure that we are consistently, that we have a process to include new findings in our procurements and our programming in partnership with all of you. So this has been a huge undertaking, but it's only one step, and this will all really only truly come to life through collaboration again. So I'm thrilled to hand it back to Lisa, and we'll introduce our field staff. Well, actually, no, I think we're doing Q&A first, right? Yeah, a few Q&A. Yeah. So I'll open the floor to Q&A before we transition to field staff. Yeah. We have a few working in.
Okay. So we have a lot of questions online and invite folks to come to the center. We're going to make this a shorter Q&A period so that we can make sure that we have time to hear from our colleagues who've traveled a really long way and or gotten up really early or stayed up really late to be with us. And then we'll come back. So I am going to start with the gentleman in the room. Please introduce yourself, and then we'll come to an online question.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Allen. I'm the director of the Mentor Initiative, Tropical Medicine, Disease Control in Humanitarian Crises. I just wanted to ask you about funding. BHA's just had a big funding cut in this new budget allocation for the government. And we're seeing that now hit a lot of fragile countries across the board, many of the fragile countries that you would be partnering with them in. Does that mean you've got the money that they've lost? Or does it mean you've also had the cut? Because your ambitious targets are a significant increase, even if you had a marginal increase. But have you suffered the same budget cuts? And how are you going to make it work?
I'll speak. Yeah, it's a great question. I'll speak to the development side of the house, and Melissa or Tracy, if you want to chime in on the BHA side, please do. So we, as I mentioned, over the past 5-year strategic period, have seen about a 19% increase in our development funding for water and sanitation. This typically is not a zero-sum game at all with BHA funding. These are kind of appropriated through separate processes. So on our side of the house, we are seeing kind of a steady increase in development assistance for WASH. But Melissa, perhaps you can take the
Nikki has
yeah.
So that everybody can hear.
Yeah, so our projections are challenging in many contexts that have had ongoing conflicts. We also have Ukraine, which has certainly pulled a lot of attention, and the Horn of Africa, the drought response and looming famines. So the last few years, we've gotten these crazy supplementals also. We never quite know when those are coming. And so it looks a bit like a fiscal cliff this year, because what we anticipate being in the appropriation, we kind of project in the humanitarian budget. We align as much as we can with what Congress is thinking now, not knowing what's kind of coming around the corner. So we are having to cut a number of places based on the current projections of appropriations. But it's always a little bit of an unknown. I do know that it's been very challenging in some contexts, South Sudan, other places. So I leave a little caveat out there, because we have been pleasantly surprised at the approach the last few years that Congress has taken, but it's no guarantee. There's a strong support for humanitarian assistance across the government that has led to these significant inputs along the way. But yeah, so right now it's a tough time because we're working on what we know, and we'll see. Yeah, sorry, not a better answer to that, but
Thanks, Melissa. We're going to do one, excuse me, one question from the online crew, and then the two of you who are at the mic now, and then we'll move on. So if you have further questions, just hang on to them till the end. So someone submitted a question. Interesting that it's called a global water strategy rather than a global WASH strategy. What is the thinking behind this?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that. So really, I would point you back to the vision, which is a water secure world. And so we are taking a broad definition of water security that is inclusive of both WASH, but broader water resources management as well, across all uses. So we feel that it's really important at this time, particularly for a whole of government global water strategy. As you'll hear in the 10:30 session, with the White House coming out with the action plan on global water security for the first time, there is a real commitment, up to the highest levels of government to make sure that we are paying attention to water for all of the reasons in our goal statement: health, prosperity, stability, and resilience through a national security lens as well. So, WASH remains front and center, but it's part of a broader water security agenda.
Hi, good morning. I'm Zach Warren with Tetra Tech. I just want to say thank you for this session, and thank you for the updates to the global water strategy. I think a lot of what we see in these evidence-based shifts is really important for sustainability, and really help inform our programming. So thank you for that. Just a quick question, when you talked about the guidance being, oh,
I just want to make sure everyone online hears you.
Yeah. The guidance being developed for including marginalized and vulnerable people. Can you talk a little bit more about what that might look like in terms of the encompassing of that beyond gender and lower wealth quintiles, for example?
Sure, I'll give the quick short answer is that will be, we've had over the course of the past 2+ years a technical brief series where we've gone deeper into specific technical areas, including things like rural water supply, urban sanitation. So this is going to be a technical brief in that series. I don't know, Lisa, as the lead author, if you want to give a sneak peek on anything, but
Sure. What we're starting out with is how do you identify the people who are most at risk of being left behind, least likely to be at the table, least likely to be visible in a community, right? So analytical tools, do no harm principles, nothing about them without them principles. And what does that look like in terms of how we design our programs and our partnerships and who we partner with? And it will provide some specific ideas around communities for which USAID has prioritized policies and strategies, but not at the exclusion of other types of marginalization. So for example, we're looking at Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, LGBTQIA+ individuals, youth, and women and girls, but not at the exclusion of understanding that there's lots of intersecting vulnerabilities. So whether or not you have land rights or housing tenure is a type of vulnerability. Climate change can produce a specific type of vulnerability. So we're starting off with how do we get better, and not what should you be doing about it, and then we'll move into what you should be doing about it.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this presentation this morning. My name is Ansley Moore, and I'm with the Global Health Council. I had a question. You referenced how the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security is working with other bureaus within USAID, such as the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, to implement the global water strategy. And so I was wondering if you could say a bit more about how the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security is working with the Bureau for Global Health, given WASH's interconnected nature with maternal, newborn, and child health, pandemic preparedness, neglected tropical diseases. Thank you.
yeah, it's a great question. So this was a highly collaborative process across all of headquarters and the field to produce the strategy. So without going kind of too much into our internal structures, but we have something called the Water Strategy Working Group at the technical level that includes all pillar and regional bureaus. So there's robust participation from the Global Health Bureau in that platform. And in fact, on our core team for the Global Water Strategy, we had a member of the Global Health Bureau who's one of the lead drafters of our agency plan. And then at a level above that, this Water Strategy Working Group fed key products with the strategies drafting to something called the Water Leadership Council that has senior level representatives from across the agency's different bureaus. So that is chaired by the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security and deputy chaired by the Bureau for Global Health, and included BHA, our policy bureau, and all of our regional bureaus as well. So Global Health was robustly involved at the technical level, member of the core drafting team, and then their senior leadership was actively involved in the review and ultimate approval of the strategy. And a lot of some of the core language that you see interspersed throughout the strategy, the prominence of health in the goal statement, reference to healthcare facilities throughout the document was kind of robustly part of and reflects Global Health's involvement. And a member of our Global Health Bureau is here today as well. All right, I know we're a little pressed for time and we'll have another Q&A. So back over to you, Lisa, and thank you all so much.
All right. So now we're gonna get to the really fun part. Not that Jeff isn't a total delight. We are going to hear from our 4 mission colleagues. We're going to start with 2 who are in the room, and then we're going to go to 2 who are online. So first we will have Joanne Dulce from the Philippines, and then Rami Webe from Lebanon. And then we'll move online to Maricel Allende from Peru and Amanda Robertson in Kenya. And just to pause, you know, a lot of folks are used to hearing from us in Washington, but our WASH leads around the world are just tirelessly doing this work and making the really hard decisions and figuring out how our brilliant ideas in the United States actually apply in their local contexts. And nothing would happen without them. And we're really, really excited that we have their participation today. We also have a few other mission WASH leads in the room and around the conference. So if you haven't met them yet, I really encourage you to seek them out. We're like literally nothing without them at USAID. So just to give you a little bit of context, Joanne and Rami were our 2022 Water and Sanitation Foreign Service National Fellows, which meant that we benefited from them coming to work on our teams in Washington over the course of this year. Joanne provided a lot of technical support around climate change. Rami helped us write the global water strategy. So these are 2 folks that really know how to bridge what we're talking about from the DC perspective with what's happening in the field. And Maricel and Amanda were this year's Water Warriors, which is an agency-wide annual award that recognizes leadership of USAID's water security, sanitation, and hygiene portfolio. So you really are hearing from some of our superstars, but like I said, they're not the only superstars. So please find our other colleagues who are here. So I am going to turn it over now to Joanne, who's going to talk about strategic objective 1.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. So for my presentation, I'd like to focus this on strategic objective number 1, which I think happens to be the most difficult and challenging strategic objective, at least under Philippine context. And so I would like to feature our water champion, which is the Philippines National Economic and Development Authority, which is the planning agency in the Philippines. And as a planning agency, its key mandate is to formulate policies and programs to ensure coordinated, continuing, and inclusive economic growth in the Philippines. But the Philippines water sector is institutionally fragmented. And by institutionally fragmented, I mean 30+ agencies performing water-related functions and about 4 economic regulators with different jurisdictions and regulating different, water service providers. And so NEDA has taken on this difficult role to lead the water sector and guide the country to achieving the SDG goal number 6 of universal access to water supply and sanitation. And apart from that, it is championing the reforms that will address the country's governance, regulatory, and financing challenges. So in 2021, NEDA released the Philippine Water Supply and Sanitation Master Plan, which basically articulates the country's commitment to meet SDG 6. And so the immediate challenge to this is the immediate challenge to achieving this national level commitment is mobilizing local governments to commit, to invest in, and to implement projects that will expand water and sanitation services in unserved areas. WASH service provision is essentially a devolved function to local governments, and presently there is no means to localize national targets at the local level. In addition, and to enable local governments do their part, there is a need for financing to increase investments in water supply and sanitation projects. And public investments in the Philippines have remained low, historically low, compared to the actual investments needed between now until 2030 to achieve universal access. And while working hard to meet SDG 6, NEDA is also leading this massive undertaking of reforming the sector. And these reforms are foundational in nature and will address the institutional fragmentation and deliver long-term benefits. These reforms involve legislation, so passing bills in Congress to create the Department of Water Resources and the Water Regulatory Commission, which are envisioned to strengthen policymaking, guide investments, and improve regulation in the country's water and sanitation sectors. Next slide, please. And so responding to these challenges, USAID's key approach is to work through and strengthen national and local systems and institutions. At the local level, USAID, through the Safe Water project or activity, introduced an evidence-based water security framework and planning process that is helping local governments identify their investment priorities and, more importantly, align these priorities with national government targets and goals. USAID also works with various partners to catalyze financing for the sector. And this involves a multi-pronged approach to, one, building the capacity of water service providers in project development to access public and private capital, facilitating partnerships among various institutions, financing institutions, to provide financing for utility scale projects, for example, septage management programs, and piloting innovative financing schemes, for example, with microfinance institutions, to increase access of poor households to sanitary toilets, or, for example, payment for ecosystem services to increase funding for water resource management. And finally, USAID is assisting NEDA's efforts to advance reforms in the sector, and the assistance includes providing technical policy and communication support to build that wide stakeholder support for long-term reforms. And as a result, slide 3, please. 2 of the 3 provincial governments of Safe Water developed and approved their water security plans, which basically sets them on a path to achieve their medium and long-term goals, as well as contribute to national targets. And on financing, USAID has mobilized 31 million of public and private funds that enabled 480,000 Filipinos access clean drinking water and sanitation services. And because governance is essentially a very challenging area to work in, USAID's advisory support is still ongoing, but this is providing NEDA access to the experts that they need, and these experts will shape the future of the Philippines water sector. Thank you very much.
Great. I'll invite Rami up, and just as a reminder, these lightning talks are going to move fast, so think about your questions both online and in the room, and we'll have another chance at the end. Rami.
Can I help? Yeah. Morning. Thank you, Joanne, for the very lovely presentation. So now it's my role to show you a real life example of what the global water strategy looks like from a mission perspective, from USAID Lebanon specifically, and for SO2 specifically. First, meet our local water hero, Mr. Gabi Nasser, who's the Director of Investments at the North Lebanon Water Establishment, what I'm going to refer to as NLWE. NLWE is one of 5 public water utilities in Lebanon that manage water, wastewater, and irrigation. And those public utilities are the USAID Lebanon's government counterparts for implementing water and sanitation programs in Lebanon. Gabi had a challenge with his potable water system in Kalea in North Lebanon. And very briefly, the challenges were that his system was insufficient and inefficient. There were people that were not still connected to the network, so they weren't receiving public water. And the network had issues. There were pressure irregularities, so not all people were receiving water equally. Actually, those upstream were receiving more water, and those downstream were receiving less, and sometimes receiving no water at all. there were frequent power outages. And because that system is a combination of a pumping station and elevated water tanks, storage tanks. So when there was no power, there was no water. And the pump station was old, more than 20 years old. It was running some 18 pumps that were off curve, which that means in technical terms, they were consuming lots of power, but delivering less than required. That was so inefficient. And the main transmission line was also old. It was broken and very distant locations, and it was leaking. So that was water lost rather than being supplied to people. And you'd be surprised, in Lebanon, we still don't have volumetric billing. So people subtract to a flat rate per year. And supposedly each house is connected through an orifice that's supposed to deliver a certain quantity of water, and people tamper with that orifice and get all the water that they want and others don't. So those were the challenges that Gabi was facing before USAID came to the rescue. Yes, proudly. So USAID, through the Lebanon Water Project, which was a 6-year project that benefited more than 700,000 people in Lebanon with improved water and sanitation. Through LWP, USAID adopted an area-wide approach, like Jeff has emphasized a couple of moments ago, and what we refer to in the local context in Lebanon as demo areas, where we were demonstrating that when you focus your efforts on an area-wide scale, you get good results. And the approach was twofold. There was a soft approach and an infrastructure support, and they were equally important and complementary. I'm going to start with the infrastructure one. So as I have mentioned, we have installed new networks, connected those that weren't connected yet to the network. We rehabilitated the pumping station. We changed the pumps setup and the configuration, installed new pumps. We constructed this state-of-the-art elevated water tank that included, that had water maintained for, stored for longer periods. And you would notice it has solar power system on it so that it continues to pump the water received from the bottom to the top and keep the tank full while there were power outages. And we installed district and household meters, like we were able to measure now what the water being produced versus the water that's being consumed, and chlorination systems to make sure that the water that's being delivered is safe. And as I said, equally important, we did all the necessary soft interventions that were needed to optimize the efficiency of the system. That included a demand management plan and a quality assurance plan to have a protocol for water quality control, monitoring, and for doing corrective actions. A risk management plan, because we were promoting that an LWE should be operating like a corporate, and they should know their risks and know how to deal with them. And now we're providing them with a crisis response and a management plan, because for those who are following Lebanon's news, there is a very severe financial crisis in Lebanon, and we're helping them deal with that crisis to maintain the bare minimum level of service. We've done testing for the water resources to make sure they're compliant, and equally important, a component that is never to be missed, outreach campaigns to involve the community, to raise awareness and to sensitize them for the use of meters, because that was news to them and they thought that that's something against them. The government is coming to take their money, while actually it's contrary to that. It's something to their benefit. And the results were amazing. So the 25,000 people in that water system have now an improved water supply. It's safe because of the chlorination systems and the water quality assurance plan. There is more water because there is more water in those tanks that tank that we have built, and which is almost full most of the times. And 1,000 people had their first time access to water because we have completed the network in that area. And equally important, an LWE's performance improved also. And by the way, we tested that, we quantified that, we did a survey, and we found out there was a 23% increase in the trust of the services by the consumers in that region. Their non-revenue water reduced 15%, their technical losses reduced 10%, and the new pump station is saving now 5,000 kilowatt hours a day because of the new configuration. Just to put things in context, in Lebanon, 5,000 kilowatt a day equals the use of 10 households a month. So you can imagine how much power was reduced because of that intervention. And all of these can be summed up that the NLWA now is more climate resilient because they have reduced their losses. There's reduction in non-revenue water. There is awareness among the community. There are volumetric billing. So they're more ready to deal with years of short rainfall and incidents of less availability of water. By the words of Mr. Gabi himself, the rehabilitation works were crucial to ensure an efficient water distribution. And that's music to our ears when we hear it from them when they use these terms, efficient water distribution. And LWP showed that we have non-revenue water. They didn't know before because they had no meters. They didn't know how much they're supplying, nor did they know how much the consumers were using of water. Finally, these are just some random 2 photos of the examples of what we did. This is a water testing equipment that LWP provided, and the one that is dearest to my heart is this one, is one of those water festivals that LWP sponsored, where they sensitized people about conservation. And you can see there the mascot of a meter, where we're making it a friendly thing rather than something to be worried about. And thank you and have a good day.
Great. So Maricel, are you able to come online, turn your video on and come off mute? Oh, there you are.
Hello.
You were just
Hi.
strangely on my screen, halfway there and not all the way over. Great. So we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Lima, Peru. Today, I want you to, well, I am Maricel Allende. I work in the Environment and Sustainable Growth Office in Lima, Peru. Next slide, please. Okay. Today, I want you to meet Chepita, a local water hero. Her name is Josefa Mesia. They call her Chepita and the mother of the waters. He's committed to water security by teaching women and men to conserve and love forests, water, and ecosystems. In 2019, Chepita received the Women on Water recognition in Peru for her important contributions for protecting water sustainability in her region. Next slide, please. Rumillacu, Mixquillacu, and Almendra, Amazonian micro watersheds in the Peruvian San Martin department, provide water to Moyobamba, a small city of 50,000 people. Climate change and deforestation due to land conversion into agriculture affected the water cycle and water availability in the area. In 2011, the first local retribution mechanism for ecosystem services, MERECE, was initiated by a group of local people and institutions, convinced that deforestation in the upper watershed was threatening water availability, causing shorter rainy seasons and a decrease of the level of water in the rivers. This was affecting rural and urban people. In 2014, a Peruvian law was approved, the MERECE mechanism. And 2 years later, a decree allowed water utilities to collect funds for MERECE projects. Since then, the MERECE Management Committee of Moyobamba and the water utility there have been challenged to develop a new project that meets new requirements for natural infrastructure investments and to ensure sufficient funding for needs identified on the ground. Chepita, who serves as president of the Moyobamba MERECE Management Committee, worked all her life to provide development to the city by educating people and creating synergies in benefit of the MERECE projects. The USAID Canada Natural Infrastructure for Water Security project, NEWS, began working with local leaders in 2019 to address their challenges. As a result of our support, a new public investment project for implementing MERECE funds has been developed, approved, and started implementation. The project was developed alongside the MERECE Management Committee and the water utility, building their capacity to lead similar efforts in the future. Chepita is a champion. In February 2022, with our support, the regional government of San Martin signed a memorandum of understanding with the water utility of Moyobamba to co-finance part of the remaining project needs. Next slide, please. Thanks. The beginning of a new Merece project in Moyobamba with the involvement of the water utility and the government of San Martin is a milestone. There are other similar initiatives that will happen soon after this one. This project will allow the reforestation of more than 400 hectares of watershed to support Moyobamba's water supply, providing greater availability of water during the dry season and creating around 21,000 days of paid labor for the local residents. This project is already supporting the development of sustainable productive value chains of coffee and honey, and embroidery of women towards the empowerment of women in the economy. Next slide, please. Okay, why does it matter? Well, it is about conservation of forests and watersheds, increasing the resilience of people to adapt to climate change by securing water sources, restoring ecosystems, and developing productive value chains. It is about improving water resource management. It is about nature-based solutions or natural infrastructure to reduce disaster risks that create more cost and even human loss. It is about mobilizing public and private funds for water security. It is about empowering women in taking decisions, in generating evidence, and improving their economy. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Excuse me, I stopped speaking for like 2 minutes and my allergies kick in. All right. Thank you, Maricel. And I see Amanda on the screen. So I'm going to turn it over to you to keep us going.
All right. Thanks so much, Lisa. And I apologize, I'm coming to you live in costume because I'm running straight from here to take my kids trick-or-treating. So yeah, you get to see me dressed as Rosie the Riveter today. So as Lisa said earlier, my name is Amanda Robertson. I'm the WASH team lead here for Kenya and East Africa. And my slides today are just going to show you photos. So you're just going to have to look to me or listen to me for the words as opposed to looking to the slides. And before we get started, I just wanted to admit that I struggled with this a little bit at first. Just when I got this this strategic objective, in some ways it's an obvious one for me as the Kenya WASH lead to take on, given that we are facing the worst drought that the country and the Horn has faced in over 40 years. What is a once in a generation or even once in 2 generations drought, and that does not seem like it's going to be letting up anytime soon. But from a WASH perspective, it's also, as many of you know, a very different type of programming than what we're often talking about. Often when I come to speak about our WASH programming in Kenya, I'm talking about, embedding in water utilities to professionalize services or working at the national level to track financing and reform policies that will allow for, tariffs, first-time tariffs for sanitations in many counties and things like that. So it was a bit of a rethinking of what I was going to be speaking about and how I was going to speak about this today. I'll go ahead and get started now. You can go to the next slide. And I wanted to talk specifically about Mary Obeli. So like I said, we have faced 4 failed rainy seasons. We are entering what looks to be the 5th failed rainy season with projections that the spring rains are likely to fail as well. And so northern Kenya and particularly our neighbors to the north are certainly in very dire situations. Frequent and intense droughts, as you all know, have severe consequences, from loss of life and food insecurity to millions of people becoming dependent on long-term humanitarian aid. Mary Obeli is one of over 4.2 million people right now in northern Kenya that need life-saving emergency access to water. This is not the 40% of Kenyans who need access to safe water, but one of the 4.2 million who needs immediate emergency life-saving access to water. She lives in Marsabit County, and like many of her neighbors, even before the drought, she struggled to access clean water and relied on shallow wells for decades. During the droughts, these became dry as well. Next slide, please. So Mary felt relief when the county government and USAID launched an initiative to reduce the distance residents must walk in search of water for survival. Marsabit actually right now is logging the longest distances for water because they are in a particularly unique situation of facing high levels of conflict, inter-ethnic conflict, conflict over resources that's layered on top of the drought. And so they in particular, we are often hearing, 40, 45 kilometers being walked to find water in Marsabit. And so since 2013, USAID has, through its Kenya Partnership for Resilience and Economic Growth, facilitated joint efforts between the national government, the National Drought Management Authority, a parastatal of the government, and 33 different USAID supported partners in the region. And part of this effort has involved helping Mary's community form what's called a ward planning committee, a ward being the smallest level of government. The committee streamlined water management and revenue collection for the ward and secured an innovative grant to install prepaid water meters, as well as a grant to rehabilitate their pipeline system. This allowed water to be piped from a borehole sunk by the Marsabit County government, leveraging the funds that the county government was putting into this. Additionally, the installment of the water meter was to curb the mismanagement of funds. Since the installation of the meters, the committee has been able to collect over $2,500 in just 6 months, while the 10 years prior to that, they never had more than $1,500 in their account. The funds have also seen the committee become self-sufficient as they are now able to take care of costs such as repairing their generator, contrary to the past when the community would wait for donors to support for such repairs. Finally, USAID is layering this direct support to communities like Mary's with working with the whole of government in advancing water security as directed under the Global Water Strategy. We've done this by partnering with the U.S. Geological Survey to conduct remote sensing of groundwater across Marsabit County as well as Turkana County. And this has allowed us to provide detailed maps and economic assessments of groundwater use projections as well as recharge projections, and trained county staff on the development, analysis, and use of this mapping data. These resources will help drive county water resource management for decades to come. And so they not only point counties to where water is now, as well as where water is most likely to be recharged and that area needs to be conserved and protected. It also gives them projections so that hopefully these resources can be managed long-term. Next slide, please. This new access allowed residents to spend their time in more economically productive ways. A reliable water flow also reduced contention among residents over the scarce resource. Community health improved thanks to a reduction in waterborne diseases and better personal hygiene. Hundreds of residents in Mary's ward and others nearby have access. And I know hundreds doesn't often sound like a lot, but in the remote, very, sparsely populated areas of places like Marsabit, where many people are pastoralists and are moving around a lot, hundreds actually covers quite a bit of geography. And so because water scarcity is set to worsen as the demand for it grows at twice the rate of population, the Marsabit County government has sunk 150 centrally located boreholes across the county and distributed plastic tanks to residents. Thanks to the joint work planning sessions facilitated by USAID throughout 6 drought-affected counties, partners are now more deliberate in identifying ways to collaborate and share data. And residents like Mary benefit as the community becomes more resilient and food secure as a result. No longer trekking several kilometers in search of water, Mary can now access clean water 2 meters away. During dry seasons, we were forced to travel long distances to fetch water, Mary said. It's not easy and you're never sure you'll get it. Now we can get water closer to our home. So I'll end with one other statement that I just wanted to share kind of as a call to action for anyone in the room who may be working in the Horn of Africa. I heard the question earlier around, if BHA resources or WASH resources for USAID were going up. And I think one thing I would say is, as someone sitting here watching the devastation of this drought, it's it is imperative that USAID continues funding this, but it's also imperative that we have others that are stepping up as well. 86% of the response to the drought here in Kenya is funded through USAID and the US government. And so just anything that we can get others, donors to do, other partners to do to step up to help fund this would just make a huge difference in lives, not only in Kenya, but throughout the Horn of Africa. So with that, I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Great. So I would like to now invite everybody up onto the screen or up to the table. Joanne, Rami, and Jeff, please. And Amanda, and what did I do wrong? No. Oh, good. Okay. No, I totally did something wrong. He's so nice. He's saying I did nothing. He's fixing it now. And for those in the room, if you have questions, either broader questions or questions about some of the specific programs you've heard about, feel free to come to the mic in the middle. And I have completely lost where the webinar is to be able to see the virtual questions. Tony, help. Tony, how do I get the virtual questions back?
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Yes, fine.
Let's get started in the room. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your question. And remembering that Amanda and Maricel are also online. Can we pin their videos too? Okay, great. Thanks. Go ahead in the room, please.
I am Steve Warner, and I've been in the sector a long time, but I consult with a lot of WASH NGOs, including indigenous and local NGOs. In the strategy, there's a lot about what we all care about as far as WASH, but I'm just curious more about the capacity building, because I see a lot of really good indigenous NGOs that still have to just scrounge for funds because they don't know how to fundraise, they don't know how to write proposals, they don't know how to manage USAID grants, things like that. So I saw some reference in the strategy to capacity building, but I'm wondering if there would be support for those kind of skill building efforts.
Yeah, Jeff, do you want to take that? And then if any of our colleagues from the mission want to give an example after Jeff speaks, that's great too.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I mean, I think
It was on, Jeff.
Is it on?
It's on.
Oh,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's on. So I think one key point to mention is that this water strategy is one of many policies and strategies that comes from headquarters out to the field. So there are corresponding strategies that are sector agnostic on localization that are meant to inform all of the work that apply to all sectors. So, one thing that I would mention is that as part of the localization agenda, there's something called the New Partnerships Initiative, where missions across the world and then Washington bureaus as well have to set specific targets about the number of awards and procurements that will be in alignment with this New Partnerships Initiative. And there are multiple modalities of partnering under that that speak to exactly the issue that you mentioned of building the capacity of local and indigenous NGOs. We know that oftentimes the localization agenda, you need to play the long game, and often that comes with mentoring from larger NGOs as well. So I know that this is applicable across many of the missions that we work in, and specifically in the Center for Water, we set up an umbrella procurement vehicle called the Diversifying Partnerships in WASH Annual Program Statement that allows all of our missions to tap into this expedited procurement vehicle that can be used for just that. So maybe I'll stop there, and if any of my colleagues want to add on.
Does anyone want to add a mission perspective? Maricel or Amanda, if you do, just start speaking because I actually can't see your video.
So thank you for that question. Under Safe Water, partnership is an intentional approach in our project. And to date, Safe Water in its fourth year, Safe Water has about 21 organizations that they've partnered with. And that is a combination of private sector organizations or private sector foundations, NGOs, and civil society organization. And part of that engagement is building the capacity of exactly those organizations, NGOs. Some of them are small farmer organizations. One is, for example, the network of water.org, which includes microfinance institutions. Safe Water recently run a training program for them to be able to track and disaggregate the kind of loans that they provide to different households, try to segmentize it, whether it's, safely or basic sanitation or basic drinking water. In the field of water resource management, because there's a lot of interest among people's organizations or CSOs in building their capacity on sustainable livelihood development in upland areas. So USAID through Safe Water is providing that capacity building. And so there's an intentional approach to that. It's a broad effort and broad and inclusive effort to include those organizations or groups of communities that you mentioned.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. We have one online that I'm gonna put to everyone. And Rami, it's about Lebanon, but I think it may actually be a question for Maricel, Amanda, and Joanne. So the question is from Larry Kobayashi, and it's: in the Lebanon situation, can this be duplicated in other regions, or is it person or leader dependent? So would anybody like to start? Yeah, feel free. And then if people from our three other regions want to opine, you're welcome to.
The short answer, yes, definitely. Because what was done in Lebanon is not so specific in terms of the approach. It's specific in terms of the interventions. So the interventions are specific to that area. But you can do that anywhere. You can pick a location where there's a well-defined system, whether geographically or any other means of definition of defining an area of intervention, identify the needs, set up the goals of what you want to achieve after attending to that system, and then you work it out backwards. So if I want more hours of water supply, what is missing? Is it infrastructure? Is it management? What is missing? If I have losses, if I'm losing money, what am I missing? And then you work it backwards. And I can safely assume that that's the approach of most of USAID interventions across so many other countries. I hope that helps. If anyone wants to add anything.
Maricel, did you want to come in on this question?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Well, we are trying to scale up nature-based solutions in the whole region. And I think that this is scale up. You can scale, you can replicate in other regions for sure, because it's about conserving the watersheds, the forests that are in the upper area of the watersheds. It's also the wetlands, the peatlands, everything that happened in the watersheds where water, started. So we need to conserve this area. We need to work there to secure water in the urban areas, in the cities, down the watersheds. So the model is very simple. You work with the people there, you provide the resources, the capacities, you develop a project, and then you work with the users of the water downstairs, down the watershed. So it's very simple, the model, but it's very complex in the country. And I know that each country has their own realities. In the case of Latin America, we have mountains in Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia that are trying to promote this type of water funds and work with the government and users of the water. And water utilities are key in the country and, well, everywhere in the region, because they need to secure the availability of water and the quality to provide to the users. So it's complex because there are many actors in the water governance in the country. And we promote, and it was a long process to have a law, to have a decree, and you have to, to work with a government that they understand that this is going to reduce the cost in the future. It's about investments. So the model here is to mobilize public money, because it's not always an NGO, it's not always the cooperation, international cooperation working there. And communities alone is very hard. So when you have the government committed and you create this law many years ago, then it was very easy because you have the framework to work with different actors in a specific area and make them, aware that climate change and water security is a reality, and they need to protect the forest, the ecosystem to have the water for the future. So what we get now is amazing, because there are a lot of public money, being mobilized to the regions, to rural areas, through the water utilities, through different entities that are willing to work with communities. So the big challenge for the future is to implement all this bunch of money that we have right now and monitor the impacts. So we already started with small funds, and I think that this for the future is going to be amazing. So we are there, and we are trying to organize these watersheds in specific areas, very critical for the ecosystem itself. And working with the government is the key actor, and the local people and water utilities. The three of them, this partnership is I think is going to success, in the future, and we need to monitor and continue this approach. And it's similar what we are doing also in Ecuador with the water funds there. So yeah.
Thank you,
And it's
Marisol.
possible to scale. Thank you.
We're just about at time. I want to be respectful that we have one person who's been waiting at the mic, and there's also one very quick thing I need to ask of you before we go. So sir, can you introduce yourself, but be very quick with your question?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief in my question. I think it's to Jeff and Joanna. You were talking, Jeff, about direct attribution, but you also work in partnerships. So how can you directly attribute if you work in a partnership? And for you, Joanna, I said you're 31 million. Would you then consider that as a direct attribution? So a very targeted question. So it shouldn't take long to answer, I think.
Yeah, sure. So on direct attribution, that's specifically in reference to our access targets. So if you're looking at new access to drinking water or sanitation, it has to be as a direct result of one of our implementing partners on the ground working for that access. To be clear, that often there's no way that doesn't happen without partnership, right? We're always partnering with government, local authorities to get that done. But specifically, we can't just claim that because we held a training in a specific area and then there was community investment that's a direct result and attributable. The indirect attribution that I was speaking to speaks more towards those governance and finance targets that are broader. Indirect being in reference to the number of people that they serve. But I think Joanne can speak to this, but on Finance Mobilize, we're also seeking direct attribution of our interventions to mobilize new public and private finance. I know that Safe Water has been doing quite a bit of that as well.
So thank you for your question. And thank you, Jeff, for explaining how robust and strict the criteria is for meeting the results and making sure that those results are attributed to USAID's technical assistance. So, and I should say though that projects work on verifying those results to be able to attribute. So for safe water, the 31 million was leveraged through a number of sources. A big chunk of those is microfinance institutions. We've seen that there is a demand for water supply and sanitation services. And so we've worked with microfinance institutions to be able to market those services and provide them the capacity to offer those services to poor households. The other one that we're seeing is that because Safe Water introduced an evidence-based water security planning process. And so we're seeing the local governments. So it was an eye-opener. These data and information was an eye-opener for them, understanding how, while they're prioritizing wash access, the investments are not following. And so they're beginning to commit their resources to be able to follow through with these priorities and investments.
Thank you. All right, don't go yet, because as we have, yes, it worked. I have no idea what I'm doing up here. Thanks, Joelle. We have alluded a couple of times to our technical briefs and other capacity development resources, and mentioned a lot of things that we're trying to do differently or in a different way or with a slightly different focus over the next 5 years. And so we'd really appreciate if you could go to open your phones. If you're online, it'll work for you there too. And go to this QR code, and it'll take you to a 2-question Google survey. You don't have to do it this second. Is it working? So it shouldn't need permission. We did have a thing with which Wi-Fi network you were using this morning. Joelle, can you fix that real quick? Luckily, the woman who owns the survey is sitting in the room. So this will take you to a 2-questions open field survey. You don't have to do it right this second, but we'd be really grateful if you would do it before you get fixed. I see a nod. Nope. Okay. We will fix it very quickly. We'd be really grateful if you could just do this before you get absorbed in the super exciting plenary at 10:30, where we will talk about similar things again. Joelle is giving me the refresh signal. So hopefully someone can refresh and confirm that it's working now. And this will give you a chance to just give us some feedback about what parts of the strategy you think we might be needing to provide more information about or more support on, so that we can best collaborate with you all moving forward. And with that, I'm going to close this out. Can I just get a thumbs up from somebody on the survey? Okay. Well, yeah. Yeah, we might be able to do that. We will also just put it up on our website and put it out in our newsletter. So for those who don't know, it's globalwaters.org, and there is a place there to really easily sign up for our newsletter. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We actually do want your feedback, so we will find a way to fix it. And with that, I'm just going to thank everyone. Thank you very much to Maricel and Amanda as well. And everyone have a fantastic Friday.